Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here today with Ben Daniel, author of a new book titled Grace Over Guns, Pursuing Peace in a Militarized World from Herald Press. Ben is the pastor of Montclair Presbyterian Church in Oakland, California, and is an award-winning writer of faith-based, left-leaning, social and political commentary, whose work has appeared in a wide variety of online, print, broadcast, and video publications, both in the United States and internationally. His previous books include Neighbor, Christian Encounters with Illegal Immigration, which was named 2011 Religion Book of the Year by Forward Reviews, and The Search for Truth About Islam, which in 2015 Library Journal recommended as an important resource for American libraries. And then finally, his book Thoughtful Christianity came out in October of 2015. Ben is a Huffington Post blogger and provides commentary for KQED-FM, the largest NPR affiliate in the United States. His writing has been translated into 4 languages and has been published by a variety of local, regional, national, and international print media, and has appeared on BeliefNet.com, TheRevealer.com, and on the websites of World Alliance of Reformed Churches and the United Nations Mission to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He's a graduate of Westminster College and of Princeton Theological Seminary. You can learn more at bendaniel.org. So Ben, thanks for joining us, and
Thank you. Yeah.
congratulations on all your work.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I should correct you, it's Westmont College, for what it's worth. Westminster is a wonderful college in the East Coast. Westmont is also a wonderful college in Santa Barbara, California.
Yes, I've actually been there. My Freudian slip, sorry.
That's all right, yeah. Westminster is a good Presbyterian name.
Yes, but no, Westmont's a great school.
Yeah.
So what else would you like people to know about you besides what I kind of touched on there?
Well, I think that as a writer and as a pastor and just as a person of faith, I have been shaped, I've been formed by the fact that I grew up on California's North Coast. We like to say it's behind the redwood curtain. Little town called Mendocino. I actually grew up in Little River, which is, had a population of 400 when I was there, and I was in the hills above Little River, in the redwoods, and went to a small high school in Mendocino and a small church in Mendocino. I was at that time, that part of California was a destination for hippie artists, which is kind of why my parents ended up there. So I was surrounded by hippie artists and loggers also, though, and fishermen and the odd pot farmer, construction workers. My parents moved up there to be hippie artists, and they bought property and were going to build their own house, which they did. That was a hard enough life for them that they ended up being Presbyterians instead of hippie artists, but they still have a little bit of that sort of hippie artist thing in them. And I think what that means, that sort of confluence of hippie artists and kind of logger with sawdust still on their boots and things like that shaped me, means that I've felt really uncomfortable conforming to anybody else's opinions about what I should be or what I should believe. And that's been good. I think it's been really good for me as a pastor, for me as a writer, for me as just a person of faith, and hopefully as, a husband and a father and a friend as well. That I think is one of the most important things about me. And I hope that shows up in my writing and other areas of my life as well.
Interesting context, right? And, and perspective. So that I didn't know that. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk more about your previous books. You wrote some very interesting things. So can you tell folks more about those?
Yeah. My first book, I wrote about immigration, and I wanted to write a book that wouldn't be needed by the time it was published, and I failed in that. I mean, we still need very much good, solid Christian guidance around immigration. But I would say that book was designed to help people know that they didn't have to be afraid of immigration, or more importantly, didn't have to be afraid of immigrants. And then my next book on Islam, I wanted people to know that they didn't have to be afraid of Muslims or Islam. My third book, Thoughtful Christianity, that was one that my publisher asked me to write, and I wrote it. And I took sort of a similar approach. I wanted people to know they didn't have to be afraid of thinking. They didn't have to be afraid that things like science and the latest knowledge about human sexuality. These things don't have to be a threat to our faith. Um, and my current book, Grace Over Guns, kind of does something similar. It's inviting people not to be afraid to ask questions about war and to challenge what I consider to be a kind of a military fetish that our country has, and don't be afraid to sort of look beyond that and ask what's possible beyond military violence. How might our country be shaped by something that isn't militarism or isn't violence? Anyway, so I address in my writing, I address really difficult and touchy issues, and I hope to do it in a way that conveys a measure of grace, a measure of whimsy, and an invitation to people not to be afraid. I write about this in my book on Islam. My mother's oldest sister was the actor Donna Reed. And one of the things that my Aunt Donna did was she was the first, the Donna Reed show was the first outfit in Hollywood to invite blacklisted writers who've been blacklisted during the McCarthy era. My Aunt Donna was the first television show, the Donna Reed show, under her guidance, was the first place that hired blacklisted writers. So my Aunt Donna was willing to say to a country afraid of communism, you don't have to be afraid of communists. In fact, I'm going to invite people into your living room and shape your concept of motherhood, these communists, right? And so I think it's part of the family legacy, helping people not be afraid, helping people know that we can just trust and love and celebrate each other and not be afraid.
So as you mentioned a minute ago, the problem with being afraid of immigrants hasn't exactly decreased
No.
since that book came out. So, I mean, can you do like a sequel to it, as a refresher course for
Yes.
folks to help with that issue more?
That's something I've pitched to my various publishers on several occasions and they haven't taken it.
Oh,
So,
bummer. Oh,
yeah,
bummer. Well, you can tell them at least
I
here's
would
a
love
one
to.
vote for proceeding with that.
Yeah, no, it definitely needs to be written, and maybe even made broader than just. I was just focusing on immigration in the United States, which still we need to talk about. Though a lot of the stuff that I write about in that book is still current. I mean, the folly of building the wall, thinking that's going to help keep immigrants out, it actually does the opposite, which I know is counterintuitive, but it creates a one-way valve. So people come forward and they can't go back, so they invite their family to come up. So that it creates this one-way valve, which increases undocumented migration in our country. That needs to be said again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
It just the walls create havoc in people's lives. And if you're worried about immigration in our country, don't build a wall. Don't militarize the border. That needs to be said again and again and again. I think that we need to talk about what's going on in Europe. We need to talk about what's going on in Australia, and all kinds of Western countries need to have a come to Jesus talk. And I mean that very literally, a come to Jesus talk about immigration. And especially, a lot of the immigration is being driven by the wars we are fighting. So the current war in Iran is going to create a major immigration issue. It's a major refugee crisis, major flow of refugees and immigrants into Europe and elsewhere. We need to talk about that. These things are all sort of connected.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, let's get to your new book. As I mentioned, the title is Grace Over Guns, Pursuing Peace in a Militarized World. And I kind of have to tell folks that this isn't about like domestic gun control.
Right.
It's about war predominantly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you talk about how the book came about and your choice of that theme.
Yeah. I have been wanting to write a pacifism book since, well, I guess since about the time I was finishing with my book on Islam. I felt like the next step was to write a pacifism book. I made the decision that I was a pacifist in, I think, 2009, something like that. And in fact, the proposed title for a pacifism book was Pursuing Peace, because I wanted to frame it in some ways about it such that it would create peace between Muslims and Christians, which it has, I think, or at least it has attempted to. But anyway, I wanted to write a book about peace going that far back. And in fact, in my book on Thoughtful Christianity, I have a chapter dedicated to pacifism. But the truth is, my publisher, Westminster John Knox Press, who published my first three books, they didn't want to take a book on peace and didn't want to publish it. And that actually, when I was working on this book, Grace Over Guns, which that wasn't the title. The publisher chooses the title. My title was Study War No More. But the when my agent and I were pitching the book to various publishers, big publishers, small publishers, everybody's response was, "This is a great book. It's a book I really hope to read someday when somebody else publishes it, but we can't publish it because we can't sell a book on pacifism." And that was true of, we pitched it to everyone from, big New York publishers to small nonprofit indies, like left-leaning folks in Berkeley and things. No one wanted. Well, finally, the Mennonites took it. The Mennonites, who have some experience selling books on pacifism, took the book. But it was a lot of rejections. And the rejections were always, "We love it. This is an important book, good writing. We can't sell it." Which was, my fear is that they're right. My fear is that Americans don't want to buy books on peace.
Well, you're swimming upstream. I mean, there's no question about that. But you've used the term Christian pacifist a couple of times. Could you just explain to folks what you mean by that?
Yeah. So I would, the simple answer to that is, I am a pacifist. I am opposed to the use of military violence. And that opposition is rooted in my faith and in the teachings of Jesus, particularly on the Sermon on the Mount. But also my Calvinism. One of the things about Calvinism is that Calvinism invites us to practice a faith that is logical, a faith that makes sense. And increasingly, I don't believe that war makes sense. I don't think it's a logical thing to do. If we could show lots of cases where wars happened, where violence happened, and the result of that violence was goodness, was true shalom, right? Peace that's not just the absence of war, but the indwelling of goodness for everyone. If war was creating those conditions, then I might not be opposed to it. But it isn't. War is just leading to more war or to the complete annihilation of an enemy. And to me, given that those are the two end results of war, I can't be opposed to it logically. And also, I can't be opposed to it if I take the teachings of Jesus seriously. Now, having said that, most Christians disagree with me, but there's always been within the Christian faith a stream of, or a thread in our fabric. There's always been a thread of pacifism. The early church was predominantly pacifist, mostly because in order to fight wars, you had to pledge allegiance to Caesar, which they didn't want to do. But they also they took the nonviolent teachings of Jesus seriously. But even, so then Christianity becomes the predominant religion of Rome, the official religion of the Roman Empire. Christians start fighting in the Roman army. But there have always been pacifists. A lot of times they lived in monasteries. A lot of times they were on the margins. In fact, they've mostly been on the margins. Then you have groups like the Mennonites, the various Anabaptist traditions, including Mennonites, as well as Quakers, Jehovah's Witnesses. There's always been that stream. There's always been that presence. And even Calvin himself was a bit of a pacifist. I mean, he wasn't fully against war, but he wasn't quite sure how you could fight a war and still be faithful to Jesus. Because anytime you kill someone, you are damaging the image of God. That was Calvin's approach. So it's a combination of Jesus and John Calvin. Jesus Christ and John Calvin is the JC combination.
So I think a couple of the authors I've worked with quite a bit are would identify as pacifists too. Parker Palmer and Philip Gulley. I don't know if you're familiar with them. Yeah.
Well, Philip Gulley is a Quaker, so that would make sense. Right. I don't know. I know Parker Palmer's name. I don't know what his affiliation is.
I don't remember either, but I think it's one of those denominations that you mentioned.
Yeah.
But So just kind of a little bit of a side note. In your book, you talk about you spent a week on the island of Iona.
Yeah.
And I recently went to Scotland. Unfortunately, did not make it to there. But can you tell folks what it was like there?
Yeah, Iona is amazing. So I've actually been there 3 times, and when
Wow.
I go, I stay in the Abbey on Iona with the
Mhm.
Iona community, and if you do that, you have to commit to staying for a week. So
Oh, okay.
and there's a little bit of writing as you walk in to the Abbey that says if you come to Iona twice, you'll come a third time. So I've done that, and I hope to go again. But you know, there in Celtic Christianity, there's this idea of the thin place where the veil between heaven and earth grows thin, and that is what I think Iona is. I mean, that's why people go to Iona. That's sort of the common wisdom about Iona is that it is a thin place, and I certainly have experienced that.
Hmm.
A feeling that God is close to humanity on Iona. And one of the great things about going there, though, now is you live in community in the Abbey, and it's one of the only places where Presbyterians practice something akin to monasticism.
Hmm.
So there's regular prayers during the day, and there's you work together. They like give you a mop and a bucket and send you out in groups of twos and threes to clean up the Abbey during the day, which builds a strong sense of community. And you learn together. You get involved in these conversations. And then you go off by yourself and walk around on the island. And so there's this wonderful combination of being in community and being alone. It's if you're someone like me, I really have high needs both as an introvert and as an extrovert, and it's perfect because sometimes I'm just with people, and then sometimes I'm by myself, and then at night there's a pub in the little village on Iona, so you go there and spend time in that sort of fellowship. It's wonderful. I recommend it to anybody. And I've also been there 3 different times a year. Once in late summer, which was great because the sun was out. Once in the middle of winter, which was awesome because the sun wasn't out and it was just blowing gales the whole time, and that was wonderful in another way. And then once in the springtime when it was lambing season, and there were daffodils everywhere and lilies. It was the flowers were amazing. The little lambs were unbearably cute. It was wonderful. So
There's
yeah,
so many
all three.
lambs and so many
Yeah,
sheep in Scotland. It's just amazing.
yeah,
So let's go back to the book. In the foreword of
yeah.
the book, Maxine Hong Kingston says it's a practical book. There are actions we can practice. And so, personally, in reading all the different books that I do, I love it when authors are practical, as
Mhm.
opposed to just like analyzing an issue and not addressing, okay, what do we do about it?
Right.
Right. And so can you tell us a little bit about what things you would encourage us to practice?
Yeah, so specifically in the book, I encourage folks to, in their congregations, to talk about being a peace church, which would be, peace denominations would be like the Mennonites or, the various Anabaptist churches, the Quakers, the Jehovah's Witnesses. These are traditions which have a historical commitment to pacifism. But any congregation, any uh, you know, church or synagogue or mosque can declare themselves a peace church. And that's what we did in my congregation. And it's what's wonderful about it is you spend time talking about what do you actually believe about war. I mean, war is a huge moral issue. I mean, war involves killing innocent people. And so what does our faith tradition tell us about that? What does the Bible tell us about that? And what are we going to do about that as a congregation? So that's one great thing. Also, encouraging young people in congregations and in families to consider declaring themselves conscientious objectors is also another very practical thing. And I have appendices in the book that talk about those two things: being a peace church, being a conscientious objector. But there's a bigger level too, sort of a bigger picture, which is we just need to talk about war. And not we're good at talking about individual wars. A lot of people are having great conversations about what's wrong with the war in Iran right now, for example. And that's good. We need to have those conversations. But we're not having as many conversations about the need for war, period, which might sound like, why did the United States have military bases surrounding Iran? Why have we had that for the last 40 years? Why do we need to have a military presence throughout the world? Why are we on such a militarized footing as a country? why are we spending so much money on the military when we can't afford healthcare for our people, or education for our children, or we can't put people in houses, or why are we spending so much money on the military when the military is polluting our environment? These are questions that we need to ask. And practically, I think we need to ask those questions, and then we need to vote. We still live in a democracy, and I still believe in citizenship. And we need to be good citizens and vote for politicians who are actually going to maybe not approve unlimited military spending, or vote for politicians who will stand up to war. I mean, when the United States invaded Afghanistan, declared war in Afghanistan, only one legislator in both houses said something about it.
Wow.
That was Barbara Lee. She's now the mayor of Oakland, where I live. Mm-hmm. But only one person, and she lived with death threats for years because she spoke out. And she, by the way, if you ever get a chance to go online and listen to her speech against the war in Afghanistan, it is one of the most profoundly Christian speeches I've ever heard from a politician. I mean, both because it clearly comes from a place of faith for her. She sometimes worships at my church, so I know her and I like her and I admire her faith. But also, she quotes a hymn of the church, one of the great hymns of the church, God of grace and God of glory. And she quotes like the third stanza in, warning that we don't become the evil we deplore. I mean, that's like a deep knowledge of hymnody, and hymnody shapes who we are as people. So it's an amazingly Christian speech, worth watching. But only one person in the entire House and Senate, only one person spoke out against it. When we invaded Iraq a few years later, I think there were two people. So we need to vote for candidates who are willing to take a stand against war, and we got to find those candidates.
No kidding.
But we need to vote. So that's another practical thing. We need to vote for people who will question war, and we need to have these conversations ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So in the book, you talk about this walking tour that you took in Ireland.
Yes.
A part of which was at Divis Tower, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Can you share with folks the meaning of that little walk?
Yeah, that was total serendipity. I had all sorts of plans to meet with folks who'd been involved in the Troubles and in ending the Troubles. There's wonderful Christian communities in Northern Ireland, and wonderful writers and poets who I wanted to get in touch with. And I had some friends help me get in touch with them, and none of them worked out. When I needed to be in Northern Ireland, they weren't available. Everything fell through. So, but I had my ticket to Northern Ireland. So I went to Northern Ireland, and I just, before I went, I just started Googling, like, what should I do? Because I'm going to be in Belfast for a couple of days. And I found this walking tour on something called, getmyguide.com or something. Yeah. It was just and so it was great. I went to I was supposed to meet at Divis Tower. I didn't know what Divis Tower was, but I had the address, and it was raining. It was just wet and cold, then we walked through the Roman Catholic neighborhood in Belfast, where the Troubles happened, and then we met at a gate in the wall that separates the Catholic and Protestant communities, which is still there. I thought, typical American exceptionalism. I thought that, the Clinton administration sort of rode in on a white horse and fixed things. And, they helped. But there's still a wall. The gates in that wall still close every night. And so we walked through the Catholic neighborhood, and we paid attention to all of the murals and memorials to people who died during the Troubles. And then we went on the Protestant side. We went and got handed off to a Protestant tour guide who did the same thing with us on the other side. Mm-hmm. Walked through the Protestant neighborhood and stopped and observed all of the murals and memorials to people who died during the Troubles. It was a moving experience, but it was also really troubling. So both the tour guides had been put in jail, had been incarcerated during the Troubles because they were terrorists. one with the IRA and the other with the Ulster Volunteer Force. And the former IRA tour guide made a big deal about the fact that he was going to shake the hand of the Protestant tour guide. Like that was a big deal. So what do you mean? Of course you're going to shake his hand. But it's still a big deal for a former IRA militant to shake the hand of a former Ulster Volunteer Forces militant. And it kind of depressed me. I mean, it was a rich experience. It was a great experience, but it was also a little depressing. And I should say that when I was there, thinking about the UK military's occupation of Belfast, this is at the time when Los Angeles was being occupied by the Marines. And when a group of clergy and I stood in the way of ICE occupying Oakland. So it felt very real that a country's military could occupy a city. And also when I was there, Charlie Kirk got assassinated. So I was aware of the presence of sort of sectarian, it's not exactly sectarian violence, but let's call it sectarian violence, political violence in the United States. And I was really worried about what would happen when, the American right has all the guns, what was going to happen in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination. So I had a lot to think about and a lot to worry about when I was there. And in fact, my first attempt at writing that introduction where I talk about Northern Ireland, that worry, that fear, that angst totally infused it. And my editor basically sent it back to me and said, you got to do something else with this because this sucks. And she was right. She was right. So I had to rewrite it, this time without the angst. So I was actually writing it on a boat that was taking me from Belfast to Liverpool because I was going to visit my son in Leeds. And on that boat, there was this Northern Ireland Irish Protestant guy who was drunk and going around and badgering all the people of color on the ship.
Oh, jeez.
And so I was really upset. And then there was a young woman walking around with a sweatshirt that had a bottle of Guinness, a guy in a balaclava, the face ski mask, which was an IRA thing, and a Molotov cocktail. And so I kept worrying that this guy and this woman were going to cross paths and start yelling at each other. So anyway, all that angst and worry got put into my first draft of the introduction. And bless her heart, Sarah, my publisher, my editor, said, you got to rewrite this. She was right. She was absolutely right. And it came out well afterwards, but it was quite an experience. And if you're ever in Belfast, I recommend that tour. It's heartbreaking, but sometimes it's important when we travel to let our hearts get broken.
Absolutely. No, I'm hoping to do that. In a couple months. So I'm gonna, just for the point of discussion, I'm gonna pick on a couple of things that you write.
Absolutely. I hope you will.
One of them is a statement that says most American Christians believe patriotism and militarism are inherently connected to and are expressions of Christian faith. So my qualm was with the word most. Which obviously is, a very subjective thing. I mean, most of the Christians that I know do not believe that. Although, I can certainly understand that there are a lot of Christians that I believe do.
Yeah.
What's your view on that?
Well, it's an observation, right? It's a subjective observation. But it's based on, here in this little village that I'm staying in Cambria, there's a vineyard church that has a banner out front that says Christ died for our freedom. And then next to that is an American flag. So there is this confluence that happens, right? That's simply idolatrous, but it's pretty common. Still, you don't have to be in that kind of church to see this. I mean, I'm currently serving as the moderator at the Presbytery of San Francisco, so I spend a lot of time in other people's sanctuaries. And there's still quite a few churches that have American flags in their sanctuaries. In fact, I think outside of the bubble I live in, probably most American Protestant churches, mainline Protestant churches, still have an American flag, and they don't question it.
For
Those
what it's
flags,
worth, we do not, and we specifically do not. But I
good,
understand what
bless
you're
you.
saying.
When you have that important conversation,
Yes.
and a lot of churches don't have that important conversation. Um, Churches which still use hymnals, which I realize there are fewer and fewer churches that use hymnals. Um, every hymnal I know about, including the ones most recently published by my denomination, the Presbyterian Church USA, still have a patriotism section. And
That's
if
true.
if we sing patriotic hymns on the 4th of July, most people aren't going to complain about it. In fact, they will complain if you don't. And also, the other thing I would say is that most pastors I know that I've talked to about this are afraid to preach against war.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they feel like if they do preach against war, there will be a backlash, giving them the kind of grief they just don't need in their lives, which I understand. Because there's this confluence in our country between war, patriotism, war, and support for the troops, and the military are sort of a special class in our society. They're untouchable. The fear that you might be criticizing the military or criticizing people who serve in the military keeps American pastors silent on issues of war frequently. Mm-hmm. Now, again, these are all just observations. The one thing I can say that's more than an observation was that when the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, so it's a while ago, 23 years ago, when they did, I preached an anti-war sermon that Sunday, and I watched members of my congregation get up and leave in the middle of the church service, and some of them never came back. And I found out later that only 16% of American pastors mentioned the war on the Sunday after it started, for and against. So we just weren't talking about it. And by the way, that sermon was a good sermon, I should say. One of the motivations for writing this book, the book that I've been wanting to write for the last more than 10 years, was a realization that was a good sermon, except the problem with it was that if you wait till after the war starts to start talking about war, it's too late. You really need to have conversations before the next war starts. Anyway, those are all the reasons I make the observation that I think most Christians don't question it. Whether they feel it or not, they don't question the connection between patriotism and faith and a support for military violence.
So even in the statement I just read, there was a quote from your book. You're lumping together patriotism and militarism in the same breath.
Yes.
And for me, there's a big distinction between the two. But
yeah, well, for me, there should be a big difference. There should be a big difference. Yes. But in our country, militarism is always present in patriotic displays. I mean, even in my little town, like I come from this weird little town, bunch of hippies. The 4th of July parade is like the weirdest thing. I love it. I go up there every year I can because it's so strange. Like my sister works for a local vet, and every year the vet practice has this big dog that they pull through town, and the dog lifts its legs and pees on people. Which, I mean, that's the kind of thing. One time I was at a party, at 4th of July party, and one of my high school teachers was just so upset because this was the first year where there hadn't been naked people in the parade. So it's that kind of parade, right? So, okay. And even then, we still have a color guard. And I think that's a wonderful expression of patriotism, to be all weird, right? Like there's the boobs not bomb parade, which is like old ladies without any clothes on protesting nuclear weapons. You don't get much more patriotic than that in my book, right? But even in those kinds of situations, there's still, the American Legion's there, the ROTC's there. There has to be a military contingent. When we have, and I write about this in the book too, in our sporting events, the United States is maybe the only country where there are patriotic displays at the beginning of sporting events in domestic competitions. And there's always, national anthems are always sung in international matches, but in domestic competitions, we're pretty much at Canada when they're playing an American league. It's NHL or the Major League Baseball or basketball. That they'll do it, but only because those are American leagues. So, and whenever there's a patriotic display at the beginning of a sporting event, there's always a military color guard. It's always there. There's these flyovers. I did an analysis of the most recent Super Bowl's flyover, the airplanes that flew over, and the capacity that they had to carry nuclear weapons was staggering. I mean, they could have destroyed whole countries, those airplanes flying over, and yet we were clapping and celebrating not because we want to kill people, but because we have conflated militarism and patriotism in our country. Mm-hmm. I think loving your country is fine, and being a good citizen is even better. I mean, what you feel is one thing; what you do with it is even more important. Yeah. But I think we really have conflated militarism and patriotism.
Absolutely. Yeah. So here's another one. You question the ability of the military to deter violence before it begins. Mm-hmm. And you say that there's no way to know for sure if a non-existent war might otherwise have happened. And I mean, obviously anything that didn't happen, you can argue whether or not it would have.
Yeah.
But with the exception of 9/11, the United States has been not, I'm aware of, militarily attacked since World War II, which is a pretty long time, right? So, I mean, you could argue, I think, legitimately that there was some deterrence going on there because of the perceived strength of the military.
Right. I would take a different understanding of that. I don't think that 9/11 was a military attack. I think it was a terrorist attack.
Which is okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, it's the second time Al Qaeda attacked the World Trade Center. They also attacked while I was in seminary.
Right.
But I think a lot of it has also to do with geography. The United States really, I mean,
that's absolutely true. We're lucky. Yeah. We've got these huge oceans, to protect us, no question.
Right. I don't think we've been attacked by a foreign country on American soil. If by American soil you mean places represented by U.S. senators, we haven't been attacked by a foreign country since the War of 1812. Hawaii was and the Philippines and Guam and Alaska were all attacked during World War II, but they were American territories. No, Manila was one of the largest American cities at the time. It was attacked by the Japanese, and the attack on Manila was written out of Roosevelt's speech about that day, which is kind of interesting. But I don't know. And certainly there's been any number of wars we've engaged in since the end of World War II, both directly and by proxy. We've killed millions of people. So you're right. We've not suffered a direct attack since World War II.
And you make a lot of point about the misuse of military, to go on the offensive as opposed to the deterrence aspect of it. And I won't argue about that being an issue at all. But just that deterrence part of it, in an ideal world, we don't need any kind of, protection or whatever, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
Well, you're right. But it's aspirational. I will say, though, we have been the most powerful military, at least since the end of World War II. And whether it was in Vietnam or in Afghanistan or Iraq, a lot of people have looked at the American military capabilities and said, you know what, let's go ahead, let's attack them. I mean, and so that includes things like the USS Cole, which is a terrorist attack. It includes, all the fighting in Vietnam and in Afghanistan and Iraq. There were more military engagements. We have way more guns, way more resources, much better training than any of those forces, and they fought us anyway. And so I don't know. I mean, it's part of the weird logic of war, I suppose, to think, well, we're righteous, we can do this, or we can outsmart those guys. But they actually have. We actually didn't really exactly win any of those wars. So
no, not at all.
They might have been right about it, So
one of the aspects of your book that I really like is kind of the whole self-reflection, on, the United States, and I think from a military perspective, and your, I guess, encouragement that we need to talk about those things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I think we have a carefully curated memory of the United States. Our history is curated, and it's curated to preserve American innocence. And we are not innocent. I was, I write about this in my book about the genocide that happened in the county where I grew up, which, according to one scholar, said is one scholar named it as the most extreme genocide in human history. Not in terms of numbers of people killed, but in terms of percentage of the population.
Hmm.
The destruction of the Yuki people in Mendocino County, and there's like one or two people left at the end of it. And the destruction of Native Americans in California in particular was devastating. As a total population, between the time the United States took possession of California from Mexico in World War I, which was about 60 years, 65 years, maybe 70 years, the population decline was 90%.
Wow.
That is equivalent to the population decline of Jewish people in Poland during the Holocaust. And I was in my 40s before I realized that. I mean, I knew that there were Native people that lived in where I grew up, the Pomo people, and I knew that I knew that there was a reservation in what we call rancherias in California, which is a little different than the rest of the United States, because for a long time the rancherias were administered by the state, not the federal government. But I didn't really think about it. Similarly, I didn't realize that the expulsion of Chinese Americans from communities in California and along the western United States, but in California in particular, that was written into the California Constitution. That Chinese people weren't allowed to be employed. They weren't allowed to own businesses. They weren't allowed to live in towns in California unless they were relegated to a specific neighborhood, which is what we would call apartheid today. And parts of that law, that the law were deemed unconstitutional, the part about not employing Chinese Americans, because that hurt American business interests. But it shaped California. I mean, there are virtually no historic Asian American communities in small towns in California, though there once were. And Chinatown, San Francisco, Chinatown in Oakland, Chinatown in Los Angeles are major centers of Asian American populations because they were shaped by our Constitution.
Wow.
And
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, well, I didn't until I was in my 50s. So I was working on this book. And then I went to the local law library to find out when that part of our Constitution was taken out. And now that part of our Constitution in California deals with like funding the Department of Motor Vehicles or something really banal. But so I went to the county where I live, Alameda County. I went to the Alameda County Law Library. It's a public library specifically dealing with law. And I got two reference librarians to help me. And it took us like a couple of hours to figure out when that part of our Constitution was removed. We're just not telling the story. We don't tell the story. And we need to tell the story. So there's a lot there that we need to learn about. We need to talk about, and we need to put a mirror on ourselves and realize that, all the stuff that we went to war against Germany for in World War II, we did that also. All the stuff we went to that happened that the Imperial Japan was doing, we did that too, because Imperial Japan, most people don't know why the Japanese bombed us on December 7th and 8th, 1941. But they bombed us because they were trying to promulgate they had a policy where there should be no foreign or Western colonies in Asia, that Asia should be for Asian people.
Right, right.
And that's what they were trying to do, trying to make sure that only Asian people were in charge of Asia. And they modeled that doctrine directly off of the Monroe Doctrine.
Yeah.
I mean, and so we did what they did, and that the German understanding of like what they call Lebensraum, living room, living space, that was the inspiration for their attempt to take over large sections of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. That was based on Manifest Destiny. It was inspired entirely by the American conquest of a whole continent and giving that over to white people.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of the same things that we went to war to stop in Germany and in Japan. And I guess the question that I ask in the book, this is the question I ask in the book, I think we all need to wrestle with, is if it was justifiable for us to bomb Dresden and bomb Frankfurt and bomb all kinds of cities in Germany, bomb all sorts of cities in Japan with fire bombs in Tokyo and Fukuoka and other places, nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If it was morally justifiable for us to do that, would it have been morally justifiable for someone to bomb our cities to stop what we were doing? And that's a question I think we have to wrestle with. And if we take seriously Jesus' suggestion that what we do to the least of our brothers, we do to Jesus, that we're supposed to treat people as we would have them treat us, if we believe what's the sauce that's good for the goose is also good for the gander, if we believe that, which I think is a pretty foundational principle in ethical dialogue or ethical philosophies, not just Christians, everybody believes that the way you treat others is the way you should be treated yourself. If we believe that, then we have some things we have to talk about and wrestle with when it comes to our wars, including World War II.
Well, I think you've already answered my next question, maybe, which is what is the number one thing you want people to take away from your book?
I want people to talk about war. This book,
these conversations,
have these. Don't be afraid to have conversations. Don't be afraid to break the taboo against questioning warfare. And don't even be afraid to break the taboo about criticizing people who wear the military uniform. I mean, most veterans I know would say they can handle it. If you ask about whether what they're doing, even ones who believe in war, they're like, yeah, we can handle it. You can go ahead and ask the questions. Ask the questions. Ask whether or not we believe it's okay to engage in war, because war always includes the slaughter of innocents. It always has, and it always will. That's how war works. War works when people kill non-combatants, including children. And that's a big moral thing to wrestle with. And because it's such an important part of our lives together, I mean, every dollar you pay in tax, more than half of that goes to the capacity to slaughter people. And so we're all complicit one way or another. So we have to talk about it. And my hope is that we will talk about it. Now, my book proposes pacifism as an alternative to warfare, to military violence. You may not agree with that. You may read my book and come away saying, yeah, I still believe that war is sometimes necessary. That's fine. I just hope you've had the conversation. I hope you've made that decision having weighed all of the evidence and having weighed all of the alternatives. And because most of us don't.
So I guess I have to ask, what's next? For you, do you have any other books planned or other projects that you're able to talk about?
Well, yeah, I can talk about it. The first thing is to make sure this book sells enough copies so that publishers will take me seriously. My first two books sold pretty well, and my third book didn't. I mean, my publisher asked me to write it, and then they changed their mind on the project. Whatever. That's their business. I was disappointed, but it's their business. But it made it hard for me to get published again, which sort of made me sad. So I'm hoping my book will sell enough copies. So if you're watching this, please go buy my book. I wanted to sell enough copies that I can write my next book. My next book, I've got two kind of different ideas percolating in my mind right now, and I need to have an honest conversation with my agent, who's also an old friend of mine. We went to college and seminary together, uh, and so his name is Mark Tauber. He used to work in on the other side as a publisher, and now he's an agent. Mark's a great guy, and he really knows his stuff. So I'm hoping that Mark and I can have a good conversation about this soon. My two ideas. One is kind of what we've been talking about, the importance of truth telling. Jesus says you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. Well, what does that mean relative to telling the truth about America's wars and a lot of things in our past that we just don't talk about? And James Baldwin says something in one of his essays where he says, the thing about white Americans is they need to face their past. James Baldwin believed that Americans of European descent and Americans of African descent needed to learn to love each other, needed to learn to get along with each other, and that wasn't going to happen until white people faced our past, faced our history. And so I'd like to write a book that talks a little bit about those things and asks, what is the role of the church in all that? What is the role of the church in this truth-telling? Should we be telling these truths from the pulpit? And if so, at what cost? Because there is a cost. That's one book that I'm sort of percolating. The other one is I'd like to write a soccer dad spirituality. I love writing about soccer. I don't know if you noticed in my book, I talk about really three different soccer games. All three of my kids played soccer. My youngest child, my son, played it seriously, and he's currently has a job as a coach. Having graduated from college, he's now a soccer coach. Cool. My wife was on Westmont's team when they won the national championship. Wow. So yeah, it's an important part of our lives, and I love writing about it. And I think there's some really cool spiritual truths, some of them uncomfortable, that we can learn watching soccer. So that's another possibility. I sort of I don't have the credentials to write a soccer dad spirituality, other than that I am a soccer dad. So.
And you went to seminary, and you're a pastor.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Good enough.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, the name of the book is Grace Over Guns, Pursuing Peace in a Militarized World. Check it out at Herald Press and also bendaniel.org. Ben, thanks so much for doing this work and for joining us, and best wishes on everything.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciated talking to you. It was a lot of fun. Take care.